Thompson. Michael Thompson's the name, or also known as NX Gamer. Yes, you may have thought we'd seen The Last Jedi. I know, I wish I bloody well hadn't. But not all Jedi are the same, it seems, and Respawn managed to capture the Jedi vibe well in their 2019 release. I'm back for what seems like the 10th time to quickly cover the new update across all 3 next-generation consoles and what to expect and what not in a focused tech review. May the Force be with us.
How predictable.
Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, the patch update they did back then was not a next-gen patch, and obviously this has now been proven true again, because here we are with a full next-gen upgrade. And what does that mean? Well, it's a free upgrade on PS5. That means that you go on and just download the free upgrade version. Even if you've got the disc, you can just have the disc installed, as you can see on screen, and then play your PS4 disc in the PS5, and you get access to the PS5 version. And obviously on Xbox, use that smart delivery method that they've advertised. There are some subtle file changes there, but overall, both versions are around 10 gigabytes larger due to the fact that they've got additional effects and texture assets and materials in the title. Like I say, it's 2 gigabytes smaller on the PS5 than the SX, but that's likely down to the SDK and compiler differences rather than any asset changes. Remember, it now uses the GDK on the Xbox, the newer Scala development kit, rather than the XDK of the previous version. And just like the PS5, it can only be run on an internal SSD or those Seagate external franchise cards. But predominantly what this does is add the modes back that were there before but taken out in the previous update, well on the PS5 anyway, so that fidelity or performance mode are back in. Fidelity gives you a native 4K at 30 FPS, that's on the PlayStation 5 and the Series X only. Now doing pixel counts there, I didn't count any point where it drops below that 4K, I'm not saying it doesn't, it would be mad if it wasn't dynamic, but generally in my few tested sections it doesn't drop. And the performance option there gives you 1440p at 60 FPS, and on the Series S you get 1080p at 60 FPS.
Slipping away! Assault him!
So on the Series X and the PS5, again, no counts below 1440p. It seems to sit there, but I would be surprised if it doesn't have some dynamic scaling, but I have a handful of counts, I never found any point. I can't say the same for the Series S though. It targets 1080-60, but it can drop as low as 720p again, but generally it can hover somewhere in 900 and 810p. It's generally a sharper, cleaner image than it was before, but some of that comes from the additional texture assets the game now has, therefore it's got higher fidelity materials to sample, even if it is at a lower resolution rate. So outside of this, what else do we get? Well, like I say, textures are better using more RAM, and the extra crispness of the image can certainly be noticed on faces, clothes and scenery. Shadows are better with a higher resolution, similar filtering, but they can still be unstable at times. This is not true on the S though, as the shadows are much closer to the last generation and largely haven't changed since the last patch. This also carries over things like screen space reflections. They are a higher res, as are most buffers, as they're likely linked to that screen buffer scale. This means all aspects, including alpha particles, shadows, etc., see a boost in line with the relative output on screen. The one caveat here is the Xbox One X version. It was the best of the last gen, and here in the PS5 and the Series X in that 60 FPS performance mode, visual quality is very, very close to the Xbox One X. The shadows, the alphas and all those kind of things are better, of course, but the overall texture details and assets aren't a significant leap over that. And overall, there are some changes to the visual output. Some alpha buffers and some bloom effects are subtly changed, sometimes better in one direction than the other. It's very close to running that version that ran at 30 with a dynamic scaling from 4K, running this now at 1440p at 60, and obviously the 4K option on the new consoles is pretty much locked 4K 30. Also, it still uses Unreal Engine 4's TAAU, so that can still cause scaling artifacts, or it tries to hide them, but obviously with that TAA, it can have some contrast and ghosting issues, which is pretty much the same as it was before, but because the buffers are higher, it looks sharper and cleaner, and therefore is less intrusive. Generally, overall, it's a similar IQ in effects, it's just sharper on your screen, textures and assets are a little sharper, and it's better than the previous modes of the last gen, but just not by a significant amount. Loading is better, but far from a huge improvement. It can take upwards of a minute to reset logic in AI, etc. from a respawn, and you would have thought that would have been their strength, wouldn't you? I mean, the clue's in the name. And this is also a likely engine issue from the scripting on reset, as it can be over a minute at times and then only 20 seconds the time after. So it can be longer than an actual fresh load into a new save, so it's not an issue of filling RAM per se. And this also means that the same memory juggling, instantiation, context swapping, cache misses still happen as before, and as I've talked about to death, highlighting my big point before these consoles even launched. Unless you rewrite your source code to use the new hardware improvements, then the improvements will be limited, even if we get a likely larger recompile within the SDK, which is what we're seeing here, and some engine changes to enable a slightly better use than the BC boost we saw last time. The new compiler on the CPU and GPU likely offer significant benefits of utilizing those, and are a big reason we are seeing such boosts in quality and performance, demonstrated by new bugs such as flickering shadows and even vacant faces rather than the original animation playing. Physics can pop around, velocity vector issues also crop up more often, likely due to the much faster frame swap now possible in cinematics. This new compiled version is also likely to help the team adapt to the new consoles as native titles for the next Fallen Order title within their engine adaptation over to that. It may or may not be using Unreal Engine 4 next time, it might even be using 5. Both are possible, and both will be equally as impressive. Input lag does feel slightly heavier than the older BC version though, certainly on the PlayStation 5. I haven't had a chance to test it, it's very quick, but it wasn't the fastest input time anyway at 30, and even at 60 it still doesn't feel the best, and that was true of the original one as well. Again, all coming down to the fact that you can't make significant changes in the engine at this level. It's largely just a recompiled version with tweaks to what they can deliver, closer to the high-end PC version I would imagine. And that brings us finally to performance, and that is significantly improved. In combat, the same context and streaming issues persist of course, but it's much better than last generation, but they still crop up and can be felt when they do. Bandwidth and validation into memory are the most likely cause in my opinion, and that's why the S suffers more when these do crop up. Loading is better on the PS5 now, but it's slightly slower on the X and the S due to that big increase in asset sizes into RAM, but we are talking about a 1 second difference from before, which is circa 6%, hardly anything to worry about. But you can see the performance delta between the Xbox One S the most. The old versions were already very close to 60 FPS anyway, and nothing has largely changed here. It's just now sharper, higher resolution, better texture assets, and overall better quality with that same performance levels as I expected would be the case once they bumped it up. But the Xbox Series S does make the biggest difference. Before, it really struggled to hold anywhere near 50. It could generally, in this opening section on Cash Out, now Cash Out I've used here because it's one of the most intensive sections of the game in terms of performance, and you can see the difference on the original Series S here, moving over to the newer version, all of them together side by side. The delta is massive, you know, upwards of 15 to 20 FPS at times. So, like I say, circa 25-35% improvement. That is not to be sniffed at, and on top of this, it runs at a higher resolution on average, and it's got better assets on average. So, it is a decent, if small, bump, but you have to give the team and EA the credit. People are very quick, including myself at times, to call companies out when they haven't done enough, but EA and Respawn certainly have. It may not be the biggest leap in terms of visual quality and presentation, but it was a significant amount of work to release this. It's free and it's available to everybody, no matter if you have the disc version or the downloaded version, and that, to me, is something to be praised. I do suspect this may have been linked with a potential tie-in to announcing the next Jedi title at E3. That didn't materialise, maybe for reasons that we all know in terms of the climate we now currently work and find ourselves in, but overall it's still a welcome boost, and it does improve the title across all versions, albeit to a lesser degree on the newer PS5 and Xbox Series X. It certainly makes a difference on the Xbox Series S, and that is the one, if you are going to play this title and you haven't played it yet and you don't have the newer consoles but you do have a Series S, then it really is a much better running, looking and visually performing title than it was before, and all of that is great as a freebie. Anyway, as you all know, I do this on the side. It's completely self-funded and independent. And obviously, if you can engage in the video, thumbs up, comments down below, share, all that good stuff. I do genuinely really appreciate each and every one of you. It really helps if I can get my reach and my extended views and subscriber rate up, because all that helps me have an even bigger impact on the market and the things we all love. Them there video games. Anyway, I'll catch you all on the next one.